It's really an honor to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. What I want to do is I want to speak briefly about the Paris Agreement. Okay, we'll start there. So the Paris Agreement is interesting. The Paris Agreement on climate change is interesting because we know that so far we're failing to meet those obligations. But what's interesting is that if you look at all of the signatory nations' commitments to reduce emissions, to keep us under 1.5 or 2 degrees. And if you add all of those up, then you'll see something remarkable. We're going to accomplish no emissions whatsoever, no emissions reductions whatsoever, regardless of the fact that we'll be pumping out ever-increasing amounts of renewable energy. Even with the Paris Agreement in place, assuming that all nations match their commitments, then we're headed for about 3 to 3.5 degrees of global warming by the end of the century. Okay? And scientists are clear that this kind of warming is not compatible with organized human civilization as we know it. Right? This is catastrophic levels of climate breakdown. Why is it that despite our commitments under the Paris Agreements, we are still on a trajectory of failure? The reason is because we will be pursuing economic growth at the same time. And the reason that becomes a problem, okay, is because economic growth is tightly connected to energy demands. So the more we grow the economy, the more we grow total energy demands, and that wipes out the gains that we're making through renewable energy. That's why, despite all of the new solar panels and wind turbines we've been pumping out over the past decades, emissions are still going up because total energy demands keeps rising. Okay. Now, if you look at the IPCC report from 2018 that came out in October, they pointed out we have to cut emissions to zero by the middle of the century. And for rich nations, it's much faster than that, given their outsized historical responsibility for emissions. Okay, so rich nations need to reach zero by about 2030, right? That's an extremely rapid trajectory. That requires nothing less than the total reversal of our present direction as a civilization. So the question is, can we accomplish that? Theoretically, we can, with something like a Green New Deal, massive public investment and mobilization towards a renewable energy transition. We know that is possible. The question is, can we do that while at the same time continuing to grow the global economy at existing rates? Okay? And the answer to that is no. And the reason is because even with existing rates of economic growth, which are about 3% per year, that doesn't sound like very much, but it's an exponential curve. That means nearly doubling the size of the global economy by the middle of the century. Right? Nearly tripling the size of the global economy by the middle of the century. That's 3 times more extraction and production and consumption than we're already doing on a planet that's already breaking. Okay? And because energy demand rises with GDP growth, all of that extraction and production and consumption will require all that much more energy, making it technically infeasible for us to produce enough renewable energy to meet that demand in the short time we have left. So the IPCC pointed out, the only feasible way to make this happen is to scale down aggregate energy demand, to consume less energy in total. The less energy we consume, the easier it is to supply the energy with renewables. Okay? Now, what's the best way to do this? This is not about using less electricity in your home, okay? I mean, yes, that's a good thing to do, but ultimately, the vast majority of the energy that our economy uses is an industry. It takes an enormous amount of energy to power the extraction and production and transportation and consumption of material stuff, okay? So the IPCC says the best way to scale down energy use is to scale down material throughput in the economy, material flows in the economy, to effectively consume less, right? And the benefit of this approach is that it addresses not just the climate emergency, but also all the other dimensions of our ecological crisis, right? This is not just about climate. It's about the broader framework of planetary boundaries. Crucially, this is not just about changing individual behavior, like privately deciding to consume less, okay? I mean, again, that's a useful thing to do, but ultimately we need an economy that's designed in such a way that it does not require ever-increasing growth simply in order to stay afloat, okay? So people talk about replacing GDP with a saner measure, right? One that takes account of the costs of ecological breakdown and social losses and so on, right? And that's good, but it's not good enough. Because even if we do switch to a more reasonable measure and think about human welfare, if material throughput and energy demand are still growing in the background, then we fail. Okay? So we need some way of systematically reducing material and energy use. And how do we do that? Well, we have to recognize the need for a kind of planned reduction in materials and energy through simple legislation, okay, like banning the practice of planned obsolescence, by which our products are intentionally made to break down after a short period of time, okay? Introducing rights to repair, introducing mandatory extended product warranties on things like refrigerators and cars and washing machines and dishwashers, right? Banning the practice of food waste by farms and by supermarkets. Liberating public spaces from advertising that compels us to consume things we don't want or even need, okay? We could even talk about scaling down specific industries that we know to be ecologically harmful, right? That we don't need, actually. Beef, right? McMansions, SUVs. We can have a democratic conversation about scaling down those destructive industries. The vast majority of people would hardly notice an impact on their lives from these kinds of policies, okay? We would consume significantly less and yet still have access to everything that we need to live good lives, okay? The question then becomes, as you scale down aggregate economic activity, what do you do about jobs? What about employment? Okay, unemployment's going to go up. You can solve that problem with a shorter working week, redistributing existing necessary labor more fairly, raising wages with better minimum wage laws, job guarantees, and so on. The key thing to understand here is that we can accomplish a kind of post-growth transition in a way that allows us to continue improving human flourishing, improving social indicators, and so on. The key is to recognize simply that we already live in an abundant economy, okay? We can meet our social goals right now simply by redistributing existing income, the resources we already have, more fairly, okay? So that's kind of the pitch that I want to make to us tonight. Thank you.
Laat ik proberen daar iets verstandigs over te zeggen. Goedenavond, dames en heren. Laat ik in ieder geval even kort zeggen dat ik het heel fijn vind om hier te zijn. In alle nederigheid vind ik het ook heel fijn om hier vanavond in aanwezigheid van mijn Belgische trio's-collega's te zijn. Daar ben ik altijd een beetje trots op. Maar nou over jouw verhaal, Jason. Dank daarvoor. Ik ga het zo direct ook over het Parijsakkoord hebben, maar dan ga ik even een andere afslag nemen. Daar komen we zo straks wel op terug. Laat ik er 2 punten over zeggen. Ik ben het eens met je analyse dat we in deze moderne tijd, als ik kijk naar alle instituties, de leidende politiek, de business, bedrijfsleven, ik zie het ook in de financiële sector. Wij zijn al een paar eeuwen verslaafd aan economische groei. En we hebben allemaal de indruk dat als we dat loslaten, dat we dan letterlijk van God los zijn en misschien wel geheel verloren. En dat is onjuist. En het is heel belangrijk dat deze oude waarheid eigenlijk op de keien wordt gezet. En dat we kunnen van Parijs alleen een succes maken als wij zoiets gaan adopteren met z'n allen als een brede blik op welvaart. En het goede nieuws vind ik, dat zie ik ook internationaal. Dirk, jij noemde toen net nog dat prachtige rapport Beyond Growth van de OECD-economen. Dat is echt een teken van deze tijd. Het brede welvaartsdenken, weg van de focus op de materiële vooruitgang, maar kijken naar het hele scala van kwaliteiten waar onze samenleving en de economie moet voldoen, dat heeft een opmars. Dat is dan weer goed nieuws. Is het daarmee voldoende? Dat is vraag 1 aan jou, Jason. Ik denk eerlijk gezegd niet. Het is wel een hele belangrijke stap die we moeten maken om van Parijs een succes te maken. Maar er is nog veel meer nodig dan dat, denk ik. Je gaf daar een voorzet voor. Het reduceren van stijgende vraag naar energie en materiaal. Dat is een hele belangrijke knop om aan te draaien. Hoe ver komen we dan met bestaande industrieën? Hoe komen we ertoe, is mijn vraag aan jou, om de politiek, de leidende mensen in landen, in bedrijven zover te krijgen dat ze deze agenda snappen en dat ze op een andere manier heil zoeken in duurzame business. Dat is de eerste vraag. En de tweede is denk ik nog iets lastiger wellicht. Dat is een vraag die ik al tientallen jaren met me meedraag. Ik ken de discussie over het einde van de groei nog uit de vorige eeuw. Toen speelde dat ook. Niet alleen tijdens de economische depressie van de jaren 80... die wereldwijd en ook in Europa en ook in mijn land, Nederland, huishield. En voor mijn generatie gewoon slecht nieuws was. Er was gewoon geen werk. Ga daar maar vanuit. Je krijgt nooit een baan, dat is de boodschap. In de samenleving zoals we die vandaag de dag hebben georganiseerd... en er is geen groei, die periodes hebben we gehad... ook na de laatste financiële crisis... zijn er jaren geweest zonder economische groei of zelfs krimp. Dat heeft Parijs niet dichterbij gebracht. Het heeft wel de maatschappelijke conflictstof over de verdeling... van wat we met z'n allen produceren en consumeren groter gemaakt. Ik denk dat een van de oorzaken van het moderne populisme daarin is gelegen. Dus ja, ik vind dat we zo snel mogelijk dat brede welvaartsconcept moeten omarmen. Ik ben nieuwsgierig naar hoe we sterker en harder... die echte circulaire economie, die zuinig is op energie en materiaal... die sluitende kringlopen die we nodig hebben, hoe we dat kunnen realiseren. En ik heb geen antwoord, misschien jij wel, Jason, op de vraag... hoe gaan we om met dat verdelingsvraagstuk? Want misschien is dat toch ook een les van de afgelopen eeuw... dat we het verdelingsvraagstuk min of meer, ik zeg het voorzichtig... min of meer op een vreedzame manier konden oplossen... in de jaren 50, de jaren 60, de jaren 70 van de vorige eeuw... omdat onze economieën groeiden en er meer welvaart was... en mensen daarvan konden profiteren. Hoe doen we dat? Wat heb je daarvoor gedachten over?
Thanks very much for the questions. Yeah, I was trying to follow, and they're very good and compelling. So I guess my first point is about the Beyond Growth initiative in the EU. I agree this is not enough. And the reason is because, again, as I pointed out, even if we change what we measure in terms of, let's focus on human well-being and social indicators instead of GDP growth, if GDP continues to grow effectively secretly in the background, okay, raising energy and material throughput, then we lose. And so we need specific plans on actively scaling that down. And right now, no one has that in place. There have been proposals in the EU that have so far been rejected, okay? This is, according to the IPCC, essential that we get these plans in place if we want to have any hope of meeting our climate objectives, okay? To say nothing of other ecological dimensions of crisis. Now, the question of recession I want to address here, right? So, crucially, what I've proposed here is fundamentally different from a recession. A recession is not what we want. A recession is a shrinkage of the existing economy that creates all sorts of negative social outcomes. High rates of unemployment, high rates of poverty, et cetera. The response to the recession across Europe has been austerity, okay? And what's the purpose of austerity? To cut wages, right? To cut regulations, to cut social spending, cut public goods, right? All in order to get growth going again. And so you see how the organization of our economy around growth, enables these destructive austerity cuts. What I'm calling for in a post-growth economy is exactly the opposite. Okay? It's an investment in public goods. It's a redistribution, a progressive distribution of existing income, so as to make growth unnecessary to meet our social goals. It's exactly the opposite of the way a recession and austerity work. Okay? So I think that's really crucial to emphasize. Now, the idea of the circular economy, let me address this briefly. It's an idea that has really captured people's attention, and I think the spirit behind it is absolutely extraordinary. The idea that we should recycle as much as possible, close the loop, stop drawing a kind of net plunder from the living world, right? And I support all of that. The crucial thing to understand is that a circular economy cannot operate in the context of a growth-oriented economy. It will never be effectively circular. There will always be pressure to extract from some external horizon, be it ecosystems or be it human labor. Like, the whole logic of growth is to extract more than you take back, right? And so we can have circular economies, improve the circularity of our economies, but to imagine that we can continue growing GDP indefinitely in such a context is ludicrous. And that's okay, because we don't need more GDP growth. Again, we're already, we live in an extremely rich economy. The problem is not a net deficit of something. The problem is that what we have has all been captured at the very top. So it doesn't benefit ordinary people. If you take the US economy, for example, has doubled in size in per capita income, right, since the 1970s. And yet poverty rates today are higher, wages are lower than they were in the 1970s. How is it possible to have a dramatic net increase in GDP per capita and yet worse social outcomes? Because the vast majority of new income from growth has been captured by the very rich, and the vast majority of ordinary people have not benefited at all. So we're effectively all working needlessly long hours to grow the economy, pushing more and more money into the pockets of the already rich with devastating ecological consequences, and we're benefiting from it not at all. It's actually a kind of madness.
Meneer Vendrik, ik heb u heel hard ja zien knikken. U gaat daarmee akkoord? Of heeft u daar nog een bedenking bij?
Misschien mag ik nog een vraag stellen, naar aanleiding van wat je zojuist zei.
Heel kort dan.
Switch to English. Is that helpful for you? Just have a conversation in English. Yes. Maybe that's for our circular energy might improve a little. On inequality, my point is I try to figure out how to tell the story of a ecological, sound, sustainable transition to a post-growth economy, given the fact that so many people that vote for populist parties today in Europe, and so they did in the United States, the election of Donald Trump becoming the next president of the United States, for God's sake. It happened in our time. They are afraid of losing more income, wealth, because they have already been deprived and isolated from a growing economy, as you just explained. So how to address these people? I mean, this is a major political topic. There is a growing support for the transition to a more ecological sound economy. But the big issue in my country, it's a really quite a strong debate, how to include those people who are afraid of, again, losing, being on the wrong side of history, as they experienced the last 2 decades. What would your solution be? How to approach these people, how to include them in this transition?
Yeah, no, it's an important question. And I think that France provides a really interesting example here. When Macron tried to introduce this fuel tax, and the Yellow Vest movement resulted, right? And I support them because that kind of ecological policy is deeply regressive and hurts the very people that we have to have on side, right? And this is crucial, is that we can't, working class people are pro-ecological policy, right? They want radical action on climate. But they don't want it to be borne on their backs when the real culprits of the problem are the rich, right? So it's essential that any kind of ecological policy or climate policy we bring out has to be fundamentally about economic justice. Okay. And I think that if that's not part of it, then we will lose and we will create enemies and ultimately will fail. So I think that has to be an essential piece of the puzzle.
So any feasible transition, it should be an inclusive, just transition, or it won't be a transition at all. You will lose all support.
Yes, I think that's essential, yeah.
Okay. Well, I fully agree.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jason en Kees, als ik jullie zo mag noemen. Bedankt voor de toelichting.